All right, take a deep breath. We're going into OSPF for IP version 6, and we're just giving you a taste of it here, but it's an important taste. We're going to go over some differences and similarities between our versions for version 4 and version 6, go over their slightly confusing names, and then we're going to do a fundamental config, show you a couple of commands to get you started, and then in the ICND2 section, the CCNA course, we're going into a little more detail with IP version 6. But first things first, OSPF for IP version 6 is the same thing as OSPF version 3. That is the technical name. The OSPF for IP version 4 we've all come to know and love is OSPF version 2. You very rarely see the term OSPFv3 anywhere. I don't remember even seeing it in a book or anything except for comparing the two versions. So if you just see the simple letters OSPF, don't make it hard on yourself. Don't think, well, you know, which version are they talking about? When you just see the letters OSPF, they're talking about version 2, which is the version used for IP version 4. Let's take a look at some basic OSPF version 3 commands here and do some comparisons between the version 6 and version 4 versions. One major difference between version 2 and version 3 is that while version 2 is enabled globally, and we did plenty of lab work with that, OSPF is enabled globally and on a per interface basis. Notice that I've got this IF in bold here because you would need both of these commands to get started. The global command is IPv6 router OSPF followed by the process ID, and the interface level command is IPv6 OSPF, then the process ID, then the area, then the word area, and the area number. So again, in both of those commands, the process ID is configured where you see the 1. Now, one similarity between the two versions is their use of the OSPF RID. OSPF version 3 uses the exact same set of rules to determine the local router's RID as version 2 did. And I know this is going to sound bizarre, but it's true. OSPF version 3 is going to need to use an IP version 4 address as the RID. So of course what you're already thinking is, well, what if there isn't one? What if, because the routers we've been working on here in the lab, we haven't put any version 4 addresses on there. Well, if you don't have a version 4 address configured on a router, when you enable OSPF version 3, you'll see this message, and we'll see it in the live equipment here soon as well, where I put IPv6 router OSPF1, I got a message immediately saying, the process 1 could not pick a router ID, please configure manually. The reason it couldn't pick a router ID is we didn't have any addresses on that router that it could use because we have to use a version 4 address for the RID. So what you can do there is use our old buddy router ID to hard code the RID. The RID has to be entered in IP version format even if you're running only IP version 6 on the router. And we'll see this on the live equipment as well, but you can see when I used iOS help, came up with ABCD, OSPF router ID and IP address format. It's not going to let you do a version 6 address for that. Let's look at some other similarities and differences between our two versions. They both use the same overall terms and concepts when it comes to areas, to LSAs, and the OSPF metric cost. Values such as the hello and dead time, again, they do have to be agreed upon for an adjacency to form and for that adjacency to remain in place. The SPF algorithm is used by both versions. Dynamic neighbor discovery is supported by both. One big difference between the two, version 3 routers don't have to agree on the prefix length. Remember in version 2, and I know that's been a while and we've hit you with a lot of information here, but remember how we had those two addresses that were actually sequential but they had slightly different masks so we could not have an adjacency? Well, again, version 3 routers do not have to agree on the prefix length. Version 3 point-to-point and point-to-multipoint configurations do not elect DRs and BDRs. Also, the OSPF version 2 reserved address 224.0.0.5 is represented in version 3 by FF02:5, and the OSPF version 2 reserved address 224.0.0.6, which we'll get to later in your studies, is represented in OSPFv3 by FF02:2:6. I know that we don't use 224.0.0.6 in the CCENT course, but that's a good address for you to know. and a good mapping. What you really want to concentrate on is that 224005 is represented in OSPFv3 by FF02, 2 colons, and a 5. So it still ends in the same number. It's easy to spot. What we're going to do when we do a sample configuration in a basic network, we're going to use the same network that we used in the static routing lab, the exact same one. And the first thing we'll do when we start that lab is get the adjacency up and running between routers 1 and 3 over their common segment, and then we'll introduce the loopback. So I'll see you in the very next video, and we'll take care of that.